Hello, my name is Darren Thomas, and I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. In this video, we're going to learn a little bit about for next loops in Excel VBA. So let's see what we can learn. Now, here on your screen is a visual of what a for next loop does. These are also sometimes called count control loops in that they loop a certain number of times. That's how they work. So what happens here is that, for example, you might want it to loop 10 times or 12 times, or in values. In other words, it pulls some data from someplace in Excel to determine how many times it loops. And this will make more sense when you see it in VBA. But you begin here at the top with I, you set I to something, whatever it is going to be, and then you start to loop. And so I kind of stands for iteration, or how many, the number of repeats, if you will. And when I is greater than whatever limit you set in place, often this limit is either you set it specifically or, like I mentioned before, Excel looks at some sort of a number of columns or rows to determine the end. Once you exceed that value, what happens is that you exit the loop over here. When you haven't exceeded that value, what happens is that you add to I one value. I normally starts at 1, and it goes up each time. So 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. Each time the loop repeats itself, I goes up one value. You can set it to other values, but this is kind of the default expected value that you set I to. It starts at 1 or maybe 0. It starts at 1, then you add 1 to it, then you add 1 to it, etc., until you reach that limit. So when you haven't reached the limit yet, you of course get a false here because this is an if-then statement. And you go back up to the beginning and you repeat the loop, whatever it is that you want the loop to check or to iterate over however many times. And this is kind of how it works out. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to go over to Excel and see what we can learn inside VBA. All right. So we're inside VBA, and we're going to have a very, very simple goal. We are going to create a function that checks how many times the number we put inside the function is divisible by two other numbers. Now that sounds kind of strange right now, but let me see if I can kind of walk you through what we're going to be doing here. So we're making a function called number check. And what does it do? It checks a number. It's going to set n as an integer. I'm going to close that off, and then the output is going to be an integer as well. All right, so that's what we're going to do. Now we need to dim two numbers here. We need to dim the I, that's kind of the iteration variable, and we need to dim another number that we're going to call C, and that's going to be like the new value, if you will, of I. Now, excuse me, that doesn't make sense just yet, but just walk with me as I go through this. So I'm going to dim I as integer. Put a comma here, C as integer. All right, there we go. Now we're going to start our for loop now. So for I equals 1. So I is going to start at 1 all the way to n. So n, in case you forgot, that's our number here. So this number could be 20 or 30 or 50 or 100. And so if you set it to 100, that means this loop is going to go 100 times. If you set n to 10, it's going to go 10 times. And what's going to happen is that as it goes through each number, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., it's going to check to see if that number is divisible by some numbers we're going to put in here in a second. That's what it's going to do. So if I equals 1 to n, if I mod 4. So if it's divisible by 4, we're using the mod here. So of course, if it's divisible by 4, the mod will be 0. Or I mod 7 equals 0. So what's going to happen is that VBA is going to go through the numbers we set for our value in here. Is going to check, sorry about that. It's going to check to see if these two numbers, if the number we put for n is divisible by 4 or divisible by 7, then C equals C plus 1. So the C here it stands for count. So if the number is divisible by 4, or if the number is divisible by 7, we're going to increment C by 1 value here. That's what we're going to do. And each time that we find a number that is divisible by 4 and 7, C will go up 1. So it's counting our results, if you will, each time. Okay, and then end if, like so, and then we go to the next I. And then the output is going to be number check equals C. So the output we want from this function is how many numbers are divisible by 4 or 7. When we go over this, whatever our end value is right here in the top line of the code, that is what we're doing right here. So let's go ahead and see if we can make this function work. So I'm going to go over here. I'm not going to deal with that right now. Let me zoom in a little bit for you. All right, that's better. So I'm going to go over here to this column. And so I'm going to put equal number check, press the tab. Now I'm going to pick a number, let's just say 40. So what's going to happen is that this thing is going to run 40 times. It's going to check number 1. Then it's going to check the number 2, check the number 3, check the number 4, etc. And it's going to count how many times a number is divisible by 4 or by 7. Close this, press enter, and you can see right here we have 14 numbers that are divisible by 4 or 7. If I make it something smaller, so I'll make it a little bit smaller. Whoops, sorry about that. Equal number check, press the tab. If I make it small, like for example, the number, number 12. So if I pick the number 12 as an example, I press equal sign, number check. Put the number 12 in here, close it out. You can see now only 4 numbers. And we know what they are. 4, 8, 12 are all divisible by 4. And the number 7 is divisible by 7. That's why we have a number 4 there. So you can kind of see how this works. Now, what we're going to do this time is we're going to go through the same process, but instead we're going to set up something called a subroutine, which is something we've talked about in prior videos. So let me go ahead and move back here. And so here's the code right here. And so let me walk you through this by typing it up again and explaining what's going on here. So we're going to make something called sub count threes. So what does it do? It counts threes. That's what it does. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to dim NR. NR stands for the number of rows as integer. And we're also going to dim our I as integer. And we're going to dim our C again as integer. And so then we're going to set the number of rows equal to the following: selection dot rows dot count. So this is going to count the number of rows that are highlighted, and that will set our number of rows that's going to be important here. Now next we're going to do for I equals 1 to NR. So I is going to go from 1 until however many number of rows we have. It could be 100 rows, 1,000 rows, 1,000,000, whatever. And this is what it's going to do. If selection dot sales, so the selection is going to be as follows: I 1 1, like this. So whatever row it is in the column is going to stay the same. If it equals 3, then C equals C plus 1. So if the number is a 3, so a -3, a +3, whatever, if it's a 3, count it. And we're going to increment our C variable here to go up by 1. That's what we're going to do. Then we go to the next I, like so. And then when we're finally done, we get a message box. And it's going to say the following: there are, put a space after R like I already did, ampersand, input my C variable, 3s in your selection. So it's going to tell me how many 3s in my selection. Put a period, close that out, and then in sub. All right, let's see how this works out. Okay, so we're going to, of course, highlight our selection first. So let me go back here. I need to zoom out a little bit so that you can see the whole thing. All right, so we got a couple 3s in here. I'm going to select this. This is what I'm going to select. And I go back to VBA, and I want to run this. All right, so I'm going to start at the top, press F8. You can see if you look at the locals pane down below, my NR variable, my I and my C are already set up. I press F8 again, and so it's going to count the rows. You can see that there are 21 rows in my data, and so now it's going to start running. So I is set to 1, it keeps going. I is set to 2, you get the ideal. You can see the C went up. I'm going to go all the way to 21 here. So it's counted, so far it's counted number 3 so far. And so now you can see it went up to 2 number 3s. And here's our output. There are 2 3s in your selection. So you can see that it worked. And you can also see that we have 21 values here, just like 21 rows of data here. And there were 2 3s in this one. In case you're wondering, they're right here in row 3 and row 17. That's where they're at. So again, another practical way of implementing and using for next loops in Microsoft Excel VBA. So let me summarize and conclude this particular video. In this video, we learned how to create, or how to use, for next loops inside Microsoft Excel VBA. And so basically how this works is that the loop repeats itself depending on whatever particular number or value you have in mind, based on whatever you pick. And so one way you can do that, as was shown in these videos, is you have it count a certain number of rows, and that becomes your end value, or however you choose how to do it. It's up to you. So that's how it works. And so by setting this number in, that's how many times that the loop will repeat itself. The I variable, or the iteration, is just keeping count of how many times you repeat the process. And so generally it goes up by 1. That's normally how it works. The C not the C function, but the C variable that we use, that was used for counting how many times we successfully met the criteria in however many loops that we had to do. That's what it was for. And so you can make functions with this, as you can see in this example. And of course, you can also make subroutines with this, as you can see in this example. So my name is Darren Thomas. I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. Thank you so much for watching, and take care.